For more stories like these, go to www.social-tv.co.za, subscribe to us on YouTube and follow us on our social mediums.
You're listening to our social newscast brought to you by www.social-tv.co.za. And today in our social newscast, we speak to Andrew Barrett, who's the CEO of a program that was launched in 2008. It's called the Olico Mass Education Program. And these guys work with youth in areas like Alexandria, Diepsloot, Bosmont, Dunoon, and Heideveld. Andrew, this is a big win for Olico in terms of getting MTN, Cell C, and Rain to zero rate the content. How did that come about? Surely zero rating is not that easy.
So, just to add, as of yesterday, Vodacom is on board as well. So we're really thrilled about it. We've got almost all of the four main telcos on here, that's with Rain. We've been trying to get zero rating since I've gone back to email since 2014 because data is a big sort of barrier to learning for learners, especially in underdeveloped communities. And so we've been working and developing an online maths program. We've been based in Diepsloot and in Alex and in Khayelitsha and in Heideveld for going on 12, 13 years now. And what we would often do is the learners would come to our computer labs or centers in these communities, and then we would work through some very tailored maths programs to get them proficient in their maths understanding, especially at that entry to high school so that they can take maths through to matric. And one of the things that we've been longing to do for a long time is to be able to allow these learners to work through that online content outside of the lab. So when they're at home on their phone or on a tablet that they can share from in their household. But one of the big barriers to that has been the cost of data. And so we're really thrilled that that's now possible for them to do. And so we've removed a major barrier, and that barrier over the COVID period has become particularly important that we overcome.
You sound so calm now, Andrew, but is it the kind of thing when you get that call or that email or that WhatsApp message that you throw your hands in the air and you do a jig, a dance, you call everybody that's been working with you? How big a moment is this?
No, it's a big deal for us. I think a good description, I think it's the lockdown period and the COVID realities has really forced the hand, I think, and the Competition Commission has been working on this as well behind the scenes for the last few years and trying to promote zero rating for websites like ourselves. And given that we've been working and asking for this for over 5 years, I mean, when it came through, it was we were really thrilled, and we did have a little minor celebration, albeit in social distancing style. Across WhatsApp and Zoom, and so it is a real silver lining on a very sort of dark COVID cloud. But it's something that I think if this has the real potential for some real long-term benefits as well, both for ourselves and for the learners that will be able to access this content. Because I mean, all the content that we've developed is free as well, so it's there, it's online, it's available for everybody, and now you don't have to pay data costs to access it either.
I can't, in recent memory, think of a platform like yours that have managed to get all the major networks to agree to zero rate your content. Do you know of any other organization?
So the DGmeri Trust has been instrumental in this as well, and they collected, I think it's close to 50 South African local NGOs and public benefit organizations who have some useful content online. There's some really nice literacy programs like Funza, which is doing some really great stuff as well. From a maths and science perspective, there's Siavula as well, doing some nice stuff, especially for 10, 11, 12. And so it actually had, what's been really nice about this is it's not just an emphasis itself as one relatively small NGO, but, across nearly 50, I think, partners who I think their beneficiaries are really going to benefit from this.
Sounds amazing.
You can go, they've put up, if people are interested, the DGmeri Trust has put up a nice website called freely.org.za. It's freely.org.za, and that's got a whole list of these websites that have now been zero rated.
Take me back to 2008. What was the dream then? Because you're now in Alexandria, Diepsloot, Bosman, Dunoon, Heideveld. You've got partners across Soweto, Ivory Park, Khayelitsha, Gugulethu, Deeprul, Eastern Cape. What was the plan back then?
So back in those days, I mean, I'm not sure that we were necessarily looking to build a big maths-focused intervention. The maths kind of came about because that is a major gateway subject that continues to restrict and limit young people's opportunities once they leave school. So unless you're hitting 50 and above for mathematics, your options after school are just so much more limited in terms of further study, further career opportunities. And so to a large extent, I think we started wanting to work in some way that is working towards reducing the current inequality. So to that extent, math support is a justice issue, and it's an issue around fairness and making sure that learners who are interested in mathematics and have the potential to excel in it can do so with support from obviously their primary schooling intervention, their teachers and their schools, but with the additional support that NGOs like ourselves can provide. And so they can access opportunities after school that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to.
I think what Olico has gotten right is that it's not just the conventional boring maths, but you guys have built in programs or those interventions that include puzzles, problem-solving activities, competition, games, and that's really what we've really been talking about over the last 15, 20 years is how do we make maths a compelling subject? How do we make it fun? And how do we break it down so that it feels accessible to everyone?
Yeah, 100%. And because part of almost half the battle with math is a psychological one and an attitude towards mathematics. So when your experience of math is often one of quite a drudgerous subject that's kind of nonsensical, it's difficult to understand how does this work or how are we reaching these various conclusions, then it's difficult to enjoy it. And so a big focus, our sort of tagline, for want of a better word, is always about make maths make sense. And this can be very fun and entertaining and challenging, and something that we found in our experiences learners really respond to. And then what we've sort of layered on top of that is just an understanding of math in a different context and with a little bit of technology mixed in. And often it's the technology that can pull the learners in the initial stages, because it's fun to work on a computer, on a cell phone, or something along those lines. And before long, it's actually the challenge of the math itself that is keeping learners engaged. So what we found is the learner will do way more math practice online than they would do with pen and paper. And so in some ways, the tech is almost a means to an end, which is to change learners' attitudes towards math.
Talking about tech, and you started with this conversation talking about the impact of COVID on different communities. And we're now, as of this conversation, sitting with a 30% plus unemployment rate. The fact that you've been able to zero rate this content, but that you're also using different technologies like WhatsApp, for example, How more important is it now to find newer avenues to be able to engage with those learners?
If we look at the realities, the schooling realities as well, going into this next sort of middle of the COVID period, and in all likelihood is going to be with us for at least another sort of 18 months in various sort of forms and probably in various degrees of intensity. I think being able to access learners remotely, where they can still be safe at home while physical distancing, that they're not increasing risk, is going to become vitally important. And of real sort of deep concern for us at the moment is if you look at your grade 8 and 9 learners, they're only set to return to school in August. Now, that means they would have lost or missed 4 or 5 months worth of schooling this year. And lots of research has been written about how much learners lose in knowledge over school holidays, which are only sort of a month long. And so it's not just the case that the learners, when they come back to school in August, are coming back in the same place that they were when they left. For most of them, they will have regressed because they haven't been working enough in between them. And that's why sort of consistent work over WhatsApp, doing some online work, especially if you don't have the barrier of data, comes vitally important to keep learners engaged. And we're running, I think it's about 37, 38 WhatsApp groups at the moment across a number of our schools. And the kids have responded with extreme enthusiasm. And I have to sort of confess that when COVID first started and we started talking about shifting to WhatsApp, I was quite skeptical. I thought we would get maybe a couple of kids kind of online, but we would struggle to get any reasonable number. But actually, I've been very, very pleasantly surprised that learners have taken to this in a big way. And that's been a real great learning from this. And parts of this we would look to continue, even when we're finally beyond the COVID period.
We haven't even talked about the numbers in terms of where are you if you had to compare this against last year's numbers, now that you're doing everything remotely. But surely there should be a bigger conversation around tech, especially in the public space. We see private schools are doing incredibly well with remote learning. But in the public space, there seems to be this gap between those that have and those that don't have. And somewhere in the middle is the teacher who isn't as confident as he or she should be in a remote learning environment.
Yeah, I mean, this is a real challenge for us. And I think you put sort of your finger on the realities that we're facing. I think the important thing is tech on its own, we've found, is very ineffectual. I mean, we did massive rollouts of tablets in Gauteng just a couple of years ago. Before that, we had counseling online. And it's not clear that we had any decent academic improvements as a result of these very expensive projects. And because often the missing component was how are we using that technology to actually improve academics, to improve maths or improve language or whichever subjects we're focusing on. And so I think the personal connection has to be there when you're using technology, whether that's a tutor or a teacher, or someone's got to be interacting with you as a learner for you to feel like this is worthwhile and that you're getting something out of it. And I think that part is often the harder part and often left out of the thinking around just delivery of technology, because on its own, it's limited. I mean, we're working quite closely with the Gauteng Department of Education and with the Western Cape After School Program. So in those two provinces, there is some recognition that this has to happen. But it's a hard thing to move quickly. It's a very slow progression, I think.
I always like to clue in our listeners to our social newscast. You guys actively work in places like Alexandria, Diepsloot, Bosman, Dunoon, Heideveld. If you go through the news online, you'll find that these areas, in one form or another, There's been rape, murder, deaths. Give us just a sense of the communities you're actively working in.
Tough. I mean, one of the big areas is safety. You touched on already, and safety of equipment and safety of people. So, I mean, we rely quite heavily on relationships with parents and keeping engaged with parents so that we can limit risk as much as we possibly can. From an equipment point of view, it's quite distressing how often computer labs in schools or community centers are targeted. And so, I mean, in a roundabout way, that this makes sort of the data, the free data through the zero rating from these telcos even more important, because learners can be working from home where there's less of a risk. And even if a computer lab does get hit, a learner with an entry-level cell phone of, a 400 or 500 rand phone even, they can actually be still actively engaging on good quality academic content.
Final question. We get the South African scorecard or the global maths scorecard every year. And South Africa has been doing poorly in recent memory. The fact that COVID has hit, the fact that we are almost forced overnight to incorporate tech a lot more, to upskill a lot more, do you see an improvement in that maths rating globally?
Cool. It's quite dire. I mean, outside of our quintile 5 schools, which are not doing too badly in sort of global comparisons, our quintile 1 to 3 and even quintile 1 to 4 schools are really struggling. And this is a real issue. What we have to do at the moment, at the beginning of this year, 300 odd schools dropped pure mathematics for grade 10 to 12. That's got to stop. And there really needs a will and commitment from the Department of Education to insist that this doesn't happen, so that learners who have the ability can continue in their school to do pure maths. And that's an important component to this. But the reason they're dropping it is because the learners, by the time they exit grade 9, they're not equipped well enough for grade 10, 11, 12 maths. And so really what we need to be doing is working younger. In our experience, sort of grade 8 is probably around about the last chance you've got to work with learners to build those foundational skills that they need to do well in matric. But there's lots. There is definitely a renewed focus and energy in the younger grades across CSI partners, NGO partners, and the Department of Education. So I think with that focus on the younger grades, and hopefully we start to get this tail effect that over the longer term, so we're talking in the next 10 to 15 years, we almost definitely should start to see some uptick on those scores, those global scores, and they should be significant.
Andrew, thank you very much for your time, and congratulations on getting your content zero rated and Vodacom joining the party.
Yeah, thank you so much.
That's Andrew Barrett, CEO of Olico Maths Education Program, talking to us about their content being zero rated by the big cell phone providers, MTN, Vodacom, Rain, and Cell C.